Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to this fifth TDL webinar on the subject of what is trust, which is highly pertinent for so many reasons. It's a good job we've got so many distinguished speakers to discuss it. For attendees, if you want to ask, you'll be on mute during the course of the webinar, but if you want to ask a question at any time, please put it in the chat and Claire, our moderator, will put it to the panelists. The webinar is due to last for an hour. It is being recorded, and a recording will be made shortly afterwards, probably at the beginning of next week. So for those of you listening, please sit back and enjoy. For the panelists, it's time to get to work. And I hand over to Claire to introduce the session.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you for TDL to organizing this webinar. For someone who has been working in the areas described by trust, trustworthiness, or similar words for more than 2 decades, trust holds a special meaning. It's a word that occurs a lot in all my papers. But it's also a word, a concept that can be defined in a variety of ways. And today, with this distinguished panel, we are going to talk about some of the ways from the technical point of view. Everyone online today is a technologist, that trust can be defined, that it can be operationalized. It usually is a topic that produces a lot of response from both technical and lay audiences. So we are very fortunate to have online people who worked in areas where trust, whatever it means for them, is important. In software, in hardware, in IT, and a lot of adjacent areas. So let me introduce briefly our distinguished panel. For the full bios of these people, please go online to TDL. The bios are posted there. In alphabetical order today, we have Matt Areno, who is CTO of Rickert-Areno Engineering. We have Joanna DeFranco, who is an associate professor of software engineering at Penn State. We have Sudhir Etiraj, a global head of cybersecurity office in TÜV Süd. He is also on the board of directors and task force lead in the Charter of Trust. We have Yiorgos Makris, who is a professor of electrical engineering and computer engineering at the University of Texas at Dallas, and Simone Onofri, who is security lead for W3C. Again, thank you very much for taking part in this panel. We will start this discussion with a brief intervention from each of the panelists. Please comment on what trust means for you in your area of focus, if it means anything. Let's start with you, Matt. What is your view?
Hi, and thanks again for having me, Claire. Pleasure to be here. So I work a lot with computer system architecture solutions for U.S. government purposes, for military applications. Obviously, as you can imagine, trust is a very persnickety, I think would be an appropriate word to use for it. It's often difficult to nail down, hence part of the reason for this conversation. What does that trust mean? Defining that trust all the way from the very beginnings in the supply chain, from the very concept and initial design work of hardware and solutions that are used, all the way through the full deployment and then the retirement of that equipment. So trust for me, and I assume that we'll be talking about this over the course of this panel, really evolves at each different stage. It doesn't mean the same thing, or I would say that the meaning is the same, but the rules change depending upon what stage of this you're in. And so a lot of the work that I do, working with these systems, working with customers on this, is recognizing that, figuring out what kind of trust we can have, what are the parameters of that trust, what we need to account for ourselves, what we can work with our customers to have, and identifying that across the entire spectrum. So for me, trust is a very moldable thing at very different stages that has to evolve. So.
Thank you very much, Matt. That certainly resonates with me, and I'm sure with other panelists. We have another panelist join us now, Mark Vial, Chief Trust Officer at ESCO. Welcome, Mark, and thank you for being here. In terms of the initial view on trust, Joanna, would you please tell us about how you view this concept and what it means to you?
Sure, and thanks for having me here today. So I'm a software engineer, and trust to me refers to those quality requirements, such as safety, security, privacy, reliability. And with any new technology, the trustworthiness topic comes up, it arises. So the user could ask, do those benefits outweigh the risks of the technology that you're going to use or are designing? So usually there's more positive reasons to adopt a new technology than to avoid it. But if you are answering yes, that the second question, that it's definitely beneficial to use, then you ask yourself, how can I minimize the risks of that system? So if the risk, for example, is a vulnerability that your home router gets hacked, or is it a risk of the medical device you're wearing may not know every use case and may not perform properly when you're using it, or is it a low code, no code solution that you're using to design a system? So all of those create different levels of risk. So how do we mitigate those, or again, evaluate the benefit outweighing the risk? So just for example, maybe it's just as simply as changing the default password of your home router, or maybe it's taking the medical device off in that use case, or it's requiring rigorous testing for the system that you use low code solution for.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Connecting risk and trust is a very good starting point. I definitely agree with it. Sudhir, what is your view on trust and how it represents itself in your space?
Thank you, Claire. I mean, the previous speakers outlined pretty much what I would be saying for trust. In general, when you look from a cybersecurity standpoint, you would need to have a common standard way of understanding when you do transactions. So between organizations and entities, there needs to be a common language that enables you to have that transaction happen. And that could include, a business transaction. So you could start by saying, okay, do I have that common level of understanding? Do we also have the common level of return? And do we all have the same understanding of what we expect from this transaction? And that is the trust that we're talking about. And what we've been seeing there, and Joanna outlined that, the safety, security, privacy aspects. So we've been seeing that in quality. So nobody's talking about it, but we've had standards that ensured this trust in the areas of quality. So ISO 9001, for example, which we specialize in, but nobody talks about it anyway these days because it's all a given. So the whole world runs on the understanding that we are working on the highest levels of quality and the highest levels of safety. However, the world is transitioning to the topics of digital trust. And I can give you two concrete examples on that. So one being in the supply chain. So when you're talking about having third-party vendors in your supply chain, so applications, you have vendors that are doing component manufacturing. how do you ensure that the vendors have the same level of understanding of the expectations that you have in your organization? And that is ensuring trustworthiness in the supply chain, right? So there are some requirements, and it could be aspects of security, it could be aspects of privacy. Those are things where we look at. And the second example that I can give you, and this is something we're working on very closely, is in the topic of trustworthiness in AI. So we are using AI in multitude of applications within organizations today. So how do you trust that the system does exactly what you intended to do, right? It's learning by itself. It's based on a lot of data. How do you make sure that the data is not poisoned? How do you make sure that the decisions that the system is helping you make, we're not talking about the chatbots and those kinds of things, but sooner or later we'll see insurance applications, credit applications are being processed with the help of AI. How do you trust that there is aspects of privacy, security, exactly listed out by Joanna before, the safety and ethics included in this decision? So there is a common level of understanding, and I think the requirement for having a standardization, having a strong understanding of the same language is going to be important in these kinds of topics. So that is what we would see as our definition of trust and digital trust, so to say. So that's my statement there, and back to you, Claire, for further questions. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Certainly, the organization where you are on the board had done a lot to represent trust in more general, formal terms for a variety of use cases, and we'll discuss it more further in the panel. Yiorgos, what does trust mean to you, and what place, if any, does it have in your work?
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for having me. I think Sudhir gave me a great cue here. I should clarify that I come from the hardware world, and contemporary semiconductor manufacturing is a very globalized business, where essentially, in order to get anything fabricated, you have to release your own intellectual property so that a third party can actually fabricate it for you. So this introduces a lot of interesting questions, especially given the globalized nature of semiconductor manufacturing. So with respect to trust, I think that from the hardware point of view, there are three different aspects that one need to focus on. The first one is the actual product. Do you trust the product of semiconductor manufacturing, the chips that come out of these foundries on which you have no control? So the typical question there, the concern posed is, how do I know that my electronic circuits that I procured through this supply chain, through this globalized supply chain, do exactly what they're supposed to, nothing more, nothing less? How do I ensure that no malicious functionality can enter my hardware and be leveraged later for malicious purposes by adversaries? So trust on the product itself is one of the three aspects. Excuse me. The second aspect is trust in the process. How do we know that the product has been produced through the exact steps in the geographic location, with the materials, with the equipment, with the processes, the steps that it is supposed to, in order to ensure various things, quality and reliability included in all of this? So provenance, traceability and provenance of the product, which essentially attests the process, is something that is very, very important in the hardware world. The third part is a little different perhaps than what you see in the software or in the system domain, and it has to do specifically with the release of the intellectual property that is required in order to fabricate anything through a third party. So in this regard, when I have some proprietary intellectual property, some hardware design that a third-party foundry will build, how do I trust that this intellectual property does not leak, that someone else doesn't take over, overproduce, or produce through separate processes, or steal entirely the intellectual property and undercut my future sales? So trust in the process so that it preserves privacy of the IP being fabricated is also particularly important and very hard to enforce, given the fact that most of the fabrication happens outside of the jurisdiction of the legal owner of the IP.
Thank you very much, Yiorgos. Certainly for many years, this product process, intellectual property protection, including cloning and overproduction, has been a significant part of my life and continues to be this. It's a very good way to condense and generalize those issues. Thank you very much. Simone, your organization has been at the very beginning of, the electronic world that we inhabit now. How do you view trust in your work? What does it mean to you?
Okay, there was a lot of definitions in the web about trust, also the web of trust, but just starting from the point with my role to try to have a standard must be secure and not harm users. Trust, when we apply this to a functionality or something, is sadly a problem, it's a vulnerability. This is my favorite definition of trust, is taken from the open source testing methodology manual. Because if I have a trusted interaction with an API or with a specific information flow, at the end I'm applying less security controls. That's because this trust from a security testing and reviews perspective is really important to be quantified and justified. On the other side, one of the most specific usage of terms of trust, which is also one part of my focus in W3C, is about trust of identity word and digital credentials. And this is very nice because at the end, also in this space, we have like 3, 4, 10 definition of trust. And probably that's because at the end of the panel, we will find probably that if we are 8, probably we will have 20 definition of trust and all valid. And for example, in verifiable credentials, which is our standards, so soon to become standard for the digital credentials, we have at least 2 levels of trust. First one is the cryptography trust. Is probably similar to the one from the hardware. So I'm going to trust that a credential is not tampered with because it's encrypted, signed and or encrypted with a specific cryptographic algorithm. And on the other side, I should need to trust, for example, if there is a credential that my name is Simone, and okay, the signature is good because the algorithm is strong and so on. Of course, I have also a human trust that, for example, my identity is signed by a trusted entity like a government, a bank, or something else. And all these things, of course, trusting this interaction is a risk. It's an opportunity, but also can create a lot of problems.
Thank you. What an excellent presentation about different levels of trust. Thank you very much for bringing it forward. Mark, your day job is focusing on trust. What does this mean to you, to your organization, and how do you view it?
Thank you, Claire. I want to add to the really good observations from the other speakers that we see a tendency and increase in transparency. So this trust, and especially in digital, is different from physical trust in the sense that we used to meet each other face to face, and now it's digital. And sometimes you do transactions that with organizations or people you've never met before. And that requires a different level. And initially people kind of say, okay, I'll trust it until something happens. But it's also when the damage is done to the trust that people become, not only for that organization, a little bit more skeptical about it, but also for other ones. I want to add that the customer drives a lot of the digital trust, and it can be an individual, it can also be an organization. Now, organizations consist of individuals who have to be trained in this digital trust and this ethics, but also the organization has to set the culture. And I think that is amplified where the transparency, and what I see as a big trend the last 6 to 7 months is that more and more organizations like ours are putting forward a trust center, which is a page where they put a lot of the credentials together in order to create that transparency. Hey, we apply with this standard that shows that vetted by third parties, official reviewers, auditors, whatever, to show and to commit to people that don't know the organization or the products that we as an organization do our best to be trustworthy. And another thing I think I would add is the cooperation and the sharing. As mentioned by some of the speakers, is you work with third parties. No organization is an island. You work with people in data centers, you work with networks. How do you trust those third, fourth, and fifth parties? And I see more and more in the business to business where I work in that these organizations say, yeah, but okay, we trust you, but what about your sub-processors, your third parties, your fourth parties, your fifth parties? How can we trust them? And that is, again, that chain of transparency, I think that is key. So that's my element that I would like to add on top of what's already been said.
Excellent comments. Of course, human element, organizational element. Even if we are talking about hard concepts like hardware security, like cryptography, like software assurance and assured development process, it matters a lot. We don't have time to discuss it in detail, but there are any number of, for instance, software development-driven attacks that are really the most easily condensed to the concept of trust that has broken out, has broken in, for example, a situation where in open source, an element that is crucial for the development has been withdrawn by one of the participants for any number of reasons, leading a lot of systems to stop working correctly. These are all outstanding comments. Let's clarify a few concepts. Joanna and others were talking about different requirements for trust with regard to different uses of systems. There are different burdens associated with, for example, a medical device and something like connected jewelry with regard to trust and protection requirements. On the other hand, it had been demonstrated that those low-cost, low-resource devices could generate significant attack surfaces for more important, sometimes mission-critical systems. Where do you think the balance lies in terms of assuring trust through technology and other processes in different types of systems? Who wants to take it first? Yiorgos, Matt, what do you think?
Me or Yiorgos? Sorry.
You, since you volunteered first. Thank you.
Sure. So, I mean, in terms of the balance, I think it becomes the burden of the person who is attempting to establish trust, the person, the entity, establishing that trust to make that balance, to identify that balance. You know, we'll talk towards the end about our actual individual definitions of trust on this. For me, one of the most important aspects of trust is that there's a mutual relationship in trust. There has to be, and we often leave that part out of trust. The mutual aspect is, this is my expectation. The end provider, be that hardware, software, whatever, if they have not agreed to what you're saying, if they have not taken upon them the responsibility of doing that, that's not trust. That's you're inferring something and you're believing something about something and you're making an assumption about it that has no foundation in trust. Trust requires mutual adherence to a defined set of standards, conducts, whatever. And trust is simply the, you know, how do you measure that? How do you measure the ability of something to adhere to that? And so finding the balance there really is a question of, well, how in sync are your expectations? Is this purely you have an expectation of something that they have not agreed to provide, and therefore there really can't be trust because that's just an unmet expectation? Or do both sides agree to this? And when both sides agree to that, you can find that balance. And that balance looking for is all built into what they can realistically do. Can a manufacturer realistically take all the steps that you feel are necessary to have trust? If they can't, then you have to find the balance of, well, this is the best that they can do. How much trust can I really have based upon what the best they can do is? And so looking at trust as an actual relationship and assessing that, I think, is where finding that balance comes from on this.
Thank you. Yiorgos, what are your views?
So I agree with Matt when the relation is a point-to-point relation. Things get much more complicated in contemporary supply chains because a lot of products are multi-purposed, in which case the amount of effort that would go into this, quest for balance in order to provide trust or even the expectation of trust is very different depending on who is the other side, and you have one of many. So in this sense, understanding levels of trust, which was brought up earlier, and creating standards not only for assessing and attesting level of trust, but also for composing trust, which is even much more difficult when you have products that combine IP or sub-products coming from multiple sources. Becomes really difficult because the math for doing this is not so straightforward. So we definitely need the standards. We need to understand what is being requested, expected, offered, possible, okay? But it is not as simple as two parties agreeing and following a protocol. At least in the hardware world, where you have chips with, 200 billion transistors on them, you're not designing everything from scratch. You get pieces of IP from 100 different sources, stitching them together with a little bit of glue logic. So again, composing trust and coming up with something that overarches the end product is not straightforward at all.
It's not. It's impossible to disagree with it in almost any area. Joanna, what do you think?
Well, so I've been thinking about all the data that we have now and the benefits of sharing data, but do we trust who we want to share the data with? So it's a little bit out of the scope of this conversation, but I have been working on a system with NIST to help share secure data and make sure that data policies are enforced at someone who wants to share data with someone else. And actually, our use case uses something from Simone's W3C verifiable credentials to make sure that whoever you're sharing data with is who they say they are. And also thinking about, do I want to send the data, or maybe I should let someone look at the data at my organization for a certain amount of time. That technology is coming, and I think that's a way we can trust people that we're collaborating with. The use case that we use often is about clinical research, where maybe a clinical research organization, maybe an educational institution, wants to share data with a hospital or wants to see the data at a hospital, but they have to follow a bunch of laws to protect data down to the field level. So how do you share that data? So our idea is keep the data at the organization and onboard somebody and make sure they are who they say they are, and only show them what we can show them. And then when they see it, then they go, they're done looking at that, and you can ensure that your data was protected. So that's just one idea. And another one is verifying systems do what they say they're going to do. In critical AI systems, we might have no way to test all the edge cases. So we would maybe create a proxy system that was built the same way. I think one of you have been talking about, how do you know the system is tested and built the way that we expect it? well, maybe they can build a proxy system the same way and test those edge cases so it's not in a critical situation. So those are two ideas that we've been working on at NIST.
Those are very productive ideas. I'm looking forward to reading the papers on this from your group later on.
Well, one is in a white paper and one's going to be an internal report. So if someone wants that information, they can contact me.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanna. Several years ago, I was asked to give a public lecture about whether or not trust could be the foundational concept that links together disparate aspects of cybersecurity. There is, of course, only a generalized answer to this very general questions, whether the answer is a yes or a no. But it is true that we have a situation where the very space of trust definitions, trust technologies is somewhat contradictory. From one point of view, we are talking about how to create trusted systems that we can trust without additional efforts for reasons that are clearly presented. On the other hand, we have predominantly marketing models such as zero trust, where you are told you cannot trust anything, and that's how you build your security. How do we bridge the contradiction between these two spaces that are frequently actually mentioned in one paper or in one set of marketing materials?
Well,
Mark, what do you think?
I always laugh when I hear zero trust, because then we wouldn't have this talk, right? Because you can't trust anybody, so we wouldn't trust. So there's not even 0.00. No, it's zero. It's literally zero. So
Right.
It's a flawed system, in my humble opinion, because it was a reaction to the issues that happened. But it's a system that's contrary to our human nature, in the sense that if we don't trust anything, but literally anything, you wouldn't be using IT, which is completely wrong. It's the wrong message to anybody who wants to join the IT system, not just employees, because we're also trying to convince employees not to trust anything and making them fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which is the oldest creator to really freak out people and stop using innovative technologies. And luckily, most people see through this marketing ploy of zero trust, because that's what it is. Basically, it's just a marketing ploy. It's not reality, because people do trust. They do transactions. They do interact with each other without seeing each other. Yes, there are risks. Yes, things happen, but I think it's dynamic in nature. And yes, I think if I hear that, I think trust, it's built up, and you get credentials, but it can also, I call it deposits. It's like a bank, you deposit trust, and as an organization, you deposit things like, oh, I have this credentials, or I have these elements to ensure that you can trust us. Also, I communicate you if something goes wrong in a transparent way. I don't try to put the blame on a third party. It's me. You're interacting with me. I see some organizations really then withdraw the trust because they try to use excuses or blame somebody else, which is like, no, it's your product, it's your service I'm taking. So, but indeed, it is dynamic in nature. It's an individual thing. And it revolves on, like somebody mentioned, ethics. It's a lot related to ethics as well. And yes, every new technology, from cloud to blockchain, from meta, virtual reality, and now AI, and soon quantum, we all need to trust. We need some reference. And some people try to find some hooks and levers to say, yeah, but can you show me? Can you show me how you can strengthen that trust? But zero trust, I never accepted it, and I will never will, because it's not who I am as a person.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Your response is that of many technologists who are presented with the zero trust model. In terms of the broad trust space with relation to accepting zero trust models, Suraj, what is your view? What is the view of the Charter of Trust of how these two extremes, you trust good products without questions, or you don't trust anything, how they could be meshed up and aligned? What are your views?
For sure. Thanks, Claire. But I think Simone had his hand up. I'm not sure if you wanted to make a point before.
Was just a follow-up to Mark. So that was also, I was expecting that zero trust flame. So happy that you started. And this is also linked probably to the second part, because we think that trust is like black and white, 0-1. And in reality, we have to start with zero trust. So even if it's a buzzword, at the end, it's a good concept. So by default, we should not trust pretty much anything, and just opening, evaluating what we are trusting to have some kind of interaction. Otherwise, with zero trust, there is zero interaction, pretty much not having the service. That's because I also like Matthew that said, okay, that's starting enumerating trust properties such as symmetry and visibility. Transparency is something also we are already talking. That's because I think it's more a slider, and is as Mark said, is an individual responsibility to understand, okay, I'm trusting this because of these specific reasons, even if, of course, there are a lot of biases or fallacies in these kind of things. Like, yes, I trust this one because there was a lot of people are trusting the same entity. And this is in theory. So trust, there is this kind of properties as transitivity, and it's a bias at the end. It is binded in our behavioral economics, how we really take decision, but okay, in theory, it should not work in this way. So just thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Certainly an excellent answer to our dilemma. Sudhir, could you please continue this thought? And also, we have a question from the audience about whether or not there is a significant difference between trust and trustworthiness. Could you address this as well?
I'm not sure if I can address it totally, the second one, but perhaps I can start by addressing what we do in the Charter of Trust as well for the round, in case you do not know it. I think, Larry, you pointed it out in the beginning that I also chair the security by default task force within the Charter of Trust, where we, as security practitioners from a few industry companies, come together and try to understand what we define by security by default and as a basis for establishing digital trust. So we basically split ourselves into three phases. So one was focused on products, that goes very much into Yiorgos, your direction. For the product level requirements, what are some of the baseline requirements for having trust? So it's not about zero trust. So I'm in alignment with what's said already about zero trust. That is more of a gimmick kind of topic to get some attention. But it's more how to ensure trust in the digital ecosystem. So when you're using products, when you're introducing applications to your organization, and there are some set of requirements that we've published, and it was basically found out. So we did 19 baseline requirements for the product level. So we found out, security by default is not just about ensuring security in the design phase, but also what happens after that, right? So the entire ecosystem around it, the processes behind it, and also the organization levels behind it when the product is introduced into the organization. And security by default also means by not enabling certain features by default. So for example, when you have applications, when you have ports, you don't have to open them by default, right? So you can turn off applications by default, and that also ensures more resilience, and use only things that you require to make sure that you have the proper functionality of that device or product. And from a process standpoint, what we defined was, the basics of having a risk assessment program, a proper risk management, understanding the risk posture within the organizations, within the processes, having standardized mechanisms according to global standards, according to global regulations. These are things that are basics to ensure that you have the resilience. Does all of this mean, can you trust it to 100%? No. But there are some commonalities, and this goes back to my introduction where I said we have the same common language where we can understand when I introduce a new product to an ecosystem, when I introduce a new process, is it trustworthy? Is it secure? Is it baseline secure? This is what we try to achieve within the Charter of Trust, and there have been publications around it. And last but not least, it's the aspect of the organizational models and the risk assessment itself. And there are several standards out there that talk about performing continuous risk assessments. And in this area, we also are relying on some of the best practices we've seen in the industry verticals. That risk assessment is one of the basics that organizations need to do, and they have to do it with a level of independence, with a level of impartiality, so that they can understand the risk posture. They can also come up with corrective measures to ensure that level of trust in those organizations. So those are the three aspects we look within the Charter of Trust. However, all of this doesn't mean that you're completely cyber secure. So I think if we are saying that somebody's 100% cyber secure, we're just joking around. So, or zero trust, but nevertheless, it's more the resilience aspect. So if there is a cyber attack, can we get back on our own feet? And at the same time, are we able to respond and recover ourselves much faster? These are the requirements that we're looking at. And I think that establishes more the trust rather than the zero trust aspect. So we're talking about how to ensure trust by default. And these were the aspects looking at products, process, and at the organization levels. So back to you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Sudhir. This is really a good answer that meshes together different views on trust and trustworthiness. If it is a different concept, trustworthiness is frequently defined in a very similar way to trust. It depends on the views and the area of research. Many of us worked in the area of trust technologies or trusted technologies for many years. I started looking into it as a student in the 1990s, which was the dawn of what is now called trusted computing. Many other technology principles and approaches have appeared since then. What do you think is the current state of trust technologies? And maybe we should go for this one top down. Usually standards distill what has been done in an area and present a fair view on a space. So Simone, what do you think is the current state of trust technologies and trust technology standardization? How do you view it from where you are sitting?
Okay, there's a lot of discussion about trusting in standards. Also, the another point is how you can trust standards, and this is another more human point. And there are one of the things I see, at least also from all the web of trust movement and all these kind of things, there are trust in two main aspects. First one is the trust for a specific claim, a specific attribute, and this is something that we already have interesting technology. And it's nice because now we are going to have trust strictly linked to cryptography. It's not because, okay, I trust entity A because there is a specific contract between me and entity A, but because it's cryptographically sound. And there's a lot of discussion now about also the concept of zero knowledge proof. So there was how I can trust something even if I don't know all the picture. And this is really interesting. This is also linked to all the things about multi-party computation and zero knowledge proof, which is, it's nice like that now concept that was born in cryptography, that was first in the blockchain and now in the world in general. So cryptography and mathematics as a meaning of trusting things. That was, in my personal opinion, fantastic. And on the other side, there was also, apart from trusting the specific part, there was also a lot of trying of standardization and also regulation, because this is something that is going outside the standards world, about the trust framework. So it's how, for example, in a specific product domain, how should we trust also an organization which is signing, for example, certificates or credentials for specific products and components. And at the end is always just that, and the fantastic concept, which is also maybe a paradox, is just the trust but verify. That was probably the key also in the standards. And when we arrive in the, okay, but verify, we are just to use regulations and these kind of things. So we still not have probably 100% cryptographic trust, sometimes delegated to regulators, but.
That's an outstanding way to present it. Sudhir, you want to add something? Please go on.
Yeah, I wanted to add especially the trust but verify part had struck a chord with me. So when we came up with the requirements in the Charter of Trust, it was the same thing. So one of the challenges was to come up with the security requirements themselves on what we see as trustworthy or trust in the product ecosystem, in the process and organization ecosystem. However, we wanted to make these requirements verifiable because we wanted to see if these requirements were implemented in the organizations. Can we do a continuous assessment if these requirements were done? And making them verifiable was one of the challenges, right? I mean, Simone, you gave examples. So we were talking about, basic things like having the state-of-the-art identity and access management systems. So when we talked about it 5 years ago, we talked about having passwords and passwordless. And then we spoke about multi-factor authentication, and now we're talking about cryptography and having a very advanced authentication mechanism. So we had to come up with requirements that said state-of-the-art authentication mechanisms according to verifiability criteria, which we had to define in detail as well. And those are things that need to be automated, but also the automation of these verification mechanisms need to be trustworthy. So it's a challenge in itself. When we move up the standards in terms of how we set the criteria for something to be trustworthy, the verification aspects become very, very tricky to come up with. So trust but verify. However, it's extremely difficult to come up with this verifiability aspect, and which is what we are trying to do as a verification certification company. Yeah. And the second aspect that I just want to bring, the standards itself, I mean, they're the basics, right? So you have the requirements and then you comply to these requirements. But I think we have to go beyond that. And that is where the verifiability and also ensuring that these implementations are taking place at the level that it is intended for, and not just, for the sake of checklists and compliance. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sudhir. Certainly excellent comments. Yiorgos, you wanted to add?
Yeah, so regarding your question about the status of trust, I think it is important to keep track of who is willing to pay for what. And this might be strange coming from an academic, but the extent of deployment and commercialization really relies on understanding or perceiving trust as value added. And I come from the VLSI test world, where our job is to make sure that manufacturing doesn't have any defects, that chips don't have any defects. So if you ask a customer to pay extra in order to get higher performance or more area, or lower power consumption, you have a value-added proposition. If you ask them to pay extra because your chips are not going to have any defects, they're going to cringe. So it's the same thing with trust. We're psychologically predisposed to expect trust. So it's very hard to make a case for monetizing trust and having to pay extra until something catastrophic happens. So if we rely on catastrophic events in order to make a commercial case for this, we have a problem. We need to do this in a little bit of a different way. So the status of trust and what the industry is doing with respect to technology, with respect to standards, with respect to commercialization, has to essentially educate customers that trust and trustworthiness is a value-added proposition, not to be expected lightly.
Absolutely. Other very crucial concepts like privacy economically are in the same area as trust. The regulatory requirements associated with trust and privacy certainly solve in part this value added, do I want to pay for it? Do I need to pay for it question? But it's an excellent point. We have touched upon many aspects of trust and also trustworthiness as it is viewed in the areas where our panelists operate. There were numerous excellent insights. Now, based on this discussion that could, of course, go on for many, many hours if we had this time, I would ask each of the panelists to come up with what they consider the definition of trust that is the most operational for their area now and in the future. Let's start with you, Mark, and go in the opposite anti-alphabetical order direction.
Oof, a definition for trust.
Yeah.
There are a lot of, and I see also in the QA that some people jump on definitions, and I think it's key that with whatever you choose as a definition on trust, it has to be one that in your organization at least is uniform. I think that's the key, because indeed I can give 20 different definitions and they will all be correct, but there can only be one in an organization, and that has to be spread over all employees and all partners that you work with to be able to connect and use that, because indeed everybody will have their own set. It's a subjective topic in a sense, and I think what I heard also from the other speakers is it is something that evolves, but also very subjective. And it's also when you take that snapshot of do you trust it or do you don't, it's taken at a certain point in time. So for me, the definition of trust is at a certain point in time, you want to make sure that whatever digitally, because we're talking about digital trust, you want to use by, you believe that this is adding value to what you want at that point in time. And it can be recommended by a person, a friend, somebody. It can be something that you have to discover. But what is key is that you make that decision at a certain point in time. So it's something that is related to, at that point in time, you go for it based on the information available at that point in time. And the other thing is that, yes, you have the right to change your perception of trust at any point in time as well. The core is, from a company perspective, you want to make sure that the customers or consumers who you want to sell your service or your products to have enough materials to validate I'll go or I don't go. That's for me the basics.
Thank you. So you're saying it's contextually validated for an organization or a person based on the available information.
Correct.
Thank you. That's a good point. Simone, what's your definition?
Okay, I'm just going to second the Mark definition. So trust is a choice, and is a choice that must be made using your specific threat model. Because there was just like a few days ago, there was one person asking me how I can trust the digital credentials API, which is an API that's going to mediate credentials to the browser. Say, okay, you have to trust the browser, you have to trust your PC, that no one is going to steal your credential. That's because it really depends on your threat model. So it's a choice depending on which are your threats you're defending, and sometimes you have to change your perception and perspective of trust.
Outstanding. Trust is a choice that depends on your priorities and contextual requirements. Very good. So, Yiorgos, what is your definition?
Well, since we've been having this discussion in the chat about trust versus trustworthiness, and trust is perceived as an action with trustworthiness as a property, I will focus on the trustworthiness aspect, and I would define trustworthiness as a metric, probabilistic metric, which will allow risk management. And That's how I view it. It's a metric that will allow me to understand, quantify, and prepare for whatever risk I am taking by integrating a product of a specific level of trustworthiness into my end offering. So it's a probability to me.
Outstanding. A probabilistic metric in support of your various choices. Well, that certainly makes sense to me. It could be both trust and trustworthiness, actually. Sudhir, what is your definition?
Thank you, Claire. So, I mean, building upon what's already said, and also what I've mentioned at the very beginning, trust to me is the ultimate basis for decision making. So that includes understanding the risk appetite, understanding the risk posture, understanding do we have a same common language when doing a transaction. So it could be between digital entities, it could be between organizations, it could be between two humans. And that is the common language, and that makes decisions much easier and standardized in terms of having that reliability, having that level of assurance. So that's for me the trust, and having a common level of assurance, probably the highest levels of assurance. That is for me the definition of trust. And we can go ahead and define trust and trustworthiness in our own way, but I think someone before mentioned that. So it's according to context. But in general, it's having that highest levels of assurance that includes safety, privacy, quality, security. These are things that enable trust and that enable a risk-based decision making. Yeah.
Thank you. So we heard it's a matter of making the choice based on potentially probabilistic metrics to assess risk. It is a foundation for decision making in certain area. Joanna, what's your definition?
Well, I love the comments happening here. To Mark's point, that trust happens at a certain point in time. I would say that that means the trust needs to be maintained throughout, right? We can't just keep trusting it. Maybe that's the trustworthiness. And I also like the point about having a metric, because that's how you verify things. So, coming again from the software area, my definition is that it's the confidence that the system is going to operate the way you think it's going to operate. It's going to be reliable. It's going to protect against harm. It's going to safeguard your data, and it's going to respect the privacy of whoever's using it at all times. So that's how I would trust it.
Thank you. An excellent definition, and it's definitely point in time and context based. And Matt, you are the last person to define trust. What is your definition?
That's tough. Sure. So I was thinking about this before the panel and wrote out some thoughts over this over the weekend. What I came up with is trust is a manifestation of the confidence of an entity's compliance to a mutually accepted code of behaviors, actions, and responses between two or more entities across a period of time. As was literally just mentioned, things may change from time to time. And I also, manifestation was the best word I could come up with, because, as we've talked about, sometimes this is quantifiable and sometimes it's not. And we have to be able to accept that. It depends upon the instances. And, a couple of things I would point out with that. Trust is not the same as faith. We tend, I don't want to get religious here with people, but we tend to conflate the two. Trust doesn't preclude the ability to gather evidence. It doesn't preclude the ability to have verification. It can literally be based upon that. We can say, I trust you because you have agreed to follow this set of metrics and you've agreed to provide me evidence of it. And that's okay. It's again, trust is not faith. They're not the same thing. And so we have to make sure that we don't conflate those two. And, we talked about this before, the original comment, being at Intel before my current position. Claire knows this. I worked for a gentleman named Martin Dixon. He handed me a presentation in 2019 talking about Intel processors. And in there it said, your modern Intel processor has over 4,000 microcontrollers and microprocessors within the single processor that you buy. If you want to tell me that you can establish trust in that, and perfect trust that everything functions properly, more power to you. I have no idea how you're going to do that. As has been said here before, there's no such thing as zero trust. You have to trust at some level and then build upon that. And so I think that's where it comes back to this mutually accepted area of, I'm just going to accept these things, and then these other things, you provide me the evidence and everything else, and when I bring it together, then I will have trust on that. And I think for me, that's the most important thing, is having the mutual understanding and acceptance of what you're actually trusting and what you're not actually trusting. We could go on with that for hours, but I'll just stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It looks like you provided a summary of the discussion. We need to trust something. Trust is not faith. It has to be based on information. It is timed. It is changing. It can engage different levels of parties, two or more. Yes, this is a good definition, as were all the other definitions provided in this group. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. I think it would be great to meet again in a couple of months to discuss more sophisticated, in-depth aspects of trust and how it actualizes itself. For now, I would like to again thank our distinguished panelists for their participation and for sharing their thoughts on this very important topic. I now pass it on to our TDL organizer, David Goodman. David, thank you very much for organizing the panel. Your last comments.
Well, thank you very much, Claire, for moderating a really fascinating discussion, and to all your panelists for showing up on time and contributing to a really thorny issue and delving into it. Our next webinar is probably on the 24th of April, but that needs to be clarified with Claire. Claire nodded, so that's good.
Yes.
Excellent. And thank you again, and have a good day or have a good afternoon wherever you are. And I like the idea of coming back in a few months and revisiting this subject, maybe from a different angle. I think that's a good suggestion.